Let's talk the securing stitch, or whatever you want to call it. It's the last stitch that you do that secures your thread. So here I have my whip stitch sample that I went all the way to the end. And so you can do a securing stitch on anything, like you pretty much need to do it on every project. I want you to see this as a double fabric because we can hide it. So I'll show you an example on here as the double fabric, and then I'll show you like the, two layers of fabric, and then I'll show you on a single layer. So I'm using really thick thread, the embroidery floss. So for demonstration purposes, this will be a big old knot, which normally I like, starting, but finishing up, it doesn't need to be that big because you want it to be hidden. You don't want any knots to show, right? Like this is just my sample, so that's why it's out there. So what I'm going to do is usually stop maybe a stitch before you're supposed to be all the way done and think about what you're going to do. I have this whip stitch, and now what I'm going to do is normally I would come out in the front, but I want my stitch to end up this one to be my last stitch right here. So I'm going to come out in between. See that? See that how I came out in between? So that when I'm done and I've done my securing stitch, you can't see anything. So here is my trick. Go in between and do your securing stitch in here. Do it, hold the needle and thread as tight as you can, like hold your stitch work so it doesn't get loosened up. But securing stitch is we're taking an eensy beensy little stitch. See how eensy beensy this is? And I might come up on the other side a little bit, but if you can hide it real close, it's good. All right, so see, I'm taking a tiny, teeny little stitch, just enough fibers to catch. And I wish I had a sharper needle. Okay, so when I pull this through, I have this loop that it makes. See this loop? I'm going to make sure it's not too twisted. See, if it's twisted, it would make a bigger knot. So I'm going to make sure that it's open. See that? And I'm going to dive through with this needle, and that creates a knot. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can do this single knot, and look, it barely shows, like it's real small. I mean, if this were a little bit thicker fabric, you could even bury it in the fibers of the fabric. You can do that single knot, or what I like to do, because I like to do overkill, is take another little stitch, keep it close, all your stitches need to be very, very, very close to right here. If I do a securing stitch over here, like away, I have this here hanging out, and that's not secure. So I'm going to undo my little example there, and I'm going to try and thread this needle super fast. Remember the trick to bend it over the needle and then sort of smush it into the eye of the needle. Okay, that's super quick. So the other way to do a securing stitch, and it's just a little variation on the one we just did. So I'm going to take a little chunk, little tiny bite. You have to get something though. It has to be sturdy, otherwise you're doing a knot on fuzz, and that's not going to work. So I've got my loop, it's not twisted. I'm going to go through and I'm going to grab the needle, but I'm going to hold this right here, and I'm going to gently pull on one side. So I'm in the middle of this, and I've got this going, and I held up this loop. So the first loop that I dove through is down here, tightening up against this, and I have this second loop, which I'm going to open up so that it's not all twisted. Let's see, use your needle if you have to. Alright, so there we go, it's not twisted. And I'm going to dive through again. And that's a double knot all in one spot. And it does take up a little extra space in the back, but I'm only taking up a little bit on the front. So I'm going to just show you how that would look again, simpler. I'm going to come out here just to show you, and I'm not going to rethread because pretend this is your last stitch. And let's say that I'm on the back of the fabric, You know, this is my last running stitch, and I'm ready to tie it off, which is another way to say it. And so I take my tiny little stitch right here, making sure I'm grabbing enough, oh, this needle, grabbing enough fabric so that it's not pulling out. And I'm going to pull, and you can go through right here. See this loop? You're going to dive through it and catch it on your needle. And if you were just doing the first method, you would just pull all the way straight down like this. And there's a little knot, and you'd probably want to do 2 of those. So let's do 2 right next to each other. Make my loop and dive through it and pull. And then the other version, I'm just going to come down over here so it's easy and quick. The other version that I like to do is it works the same, you know, start the same way, take your little bite, tiny little bite, and here's that loop. Well, I'm going to dive through that loop, but instead of just pulling all the way, I'm holding right here, and I'm slowly tightening that first loop down. Oops, I pulled too tight. There we go. So I pulled that first loop down so that it's securing this thread, but then I'm going to go dive back through that loop, and it makes a little double knot. See? All right, one more time, because I want to show you a little something here. Whoops, I'm going to go right, I'm going to come up here, pretend this is our last stitch in the back. Uh-oh, there goes my thread. I'm going to do my quick trick of over the needle, hold it tight, pinch it. Sorry, I keep getting off center there. Pinch it, put the eye on it, and just sort of mush it through. Super fast, even with thick embroidery floss. Okay. You can take your little bite. And this is usually done on the back because we don't want these knots showing on the front. See? Oops, that was, never mind. Forget, I just did that. But anyway, they don't show up much on the front. Here's my loop that I'm diving through, and here's the loop that I want to preserve. So pull out my tail, and I'm gonna go like this. You pull on one of the ends, like you figured out. If you pull the top one, it's gonna pull from your needle, but if you pull this other one, it'll tighten it down. And then I'm gonna go back through. And in theory, you could do this all day long until you run out of thread. You can go back in, tighten it down, go back through the loop. I'm gonna lose my thread. Tighten it down, go back through. You could do it however many times you want, but 2 is usually good. The more you do, the bigger the knot it's gonna be. But that's a securing stitch. Okay? One more time for anybody who needs it for a single layer. If you are doing a double layer, you got to go through both layers in your little bite. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. For an example other than this, this is a special trick because I do have these 2 layers. But if you, let's say you are fixing something and you're on the inside of the project, you can, make sure you're going through both layers. Because if I just secure it here, I might have an opening there. So, alright, and you can make the loops this small if you want. And I'm going to tug on one side of this to tighten that first loop up. And I'm going to make sure my loop is nice and open and not twist. See, if I twist this and then I go through, it makes a bigger knot, which generally the second one we don't want it so big. It's up to you. You want a big old knot? Twirl it. If you don't want a big knot, open it up so that it's open and ready. So there, that's a really secure thread. It's secured multiple times. And now we're done.